That's so great. How cool is that? You know, the thing about shooting stars that I've always loved is their size. They are the size of a grain of sand. And yet they burn so bright they can be seen from every corner of that dome that it's shooting under. Just consider that. This tiny little particle the size of a grain of sand burns so bright. It's something. And then it has the power to motivate, right? It has the power to sort of instill this mystery and instill this hope towards some goal, right? The wish. It's something. From this tiniest little particles come dreams, come hope. It's a beautiful kind of message, actually. It's really an interesting reminder. Think about the next time we have a meteor shower. Now we're talking. So Missy, thanks for popping in. How you doing? Good to see you. I'm going to wait for the stream to build up a little tonight. Tonight's going to be interesting. Tonight's going to be fun. There's you know, I've been talking a lot about this process, right? This idea of this process, the instructions for building the key, right? This doesn't give you access to the inner sanctum. It gives you instructions for building the key, and then you take that key and open the door yourself. But you know, we have the order, the divine order of how the cards line up, and it only works if it's in that order. The vortex, the algorithm, so forth. And I've been talking about the algorithm, but I haven't really given too much detail to that. And so what I'm going to do is to just speak the algorithm openly. And what it is that every two has a third. And this is a concept that I think anybody who is open to this idea and lets it in is going to be able to take this to so many different parts of their lives. Whenever you are interrogating a situation as to what to do next, this is the tarot unlocked in a single equation. That's the point of this. And what the algorithm is that ultimate deep secret in a tiny little formula. It is the formula for the answer. And then that begs for the truth, which leads you to the next steps. Essentially, the algorithm gives you the bridge between the inner order and the inner sanctum. It's a step right before truth. And so every two has a third is great. You guys are going to love that. It's something that is a technique that, again, you don't have to memorize because it's so easy to think about and to implement. It doesn't need any tools, any cards, anything. You can be anywhere at any time and pull this out, apply it to the situation that you're in, and have meaningful insight into that situation. Okay. And now, you know, what I'm trying to do here in this stream is two things: wake you up to who you are, introduce you to yourself. And the second thing is to maintain the integrity of the art. And the way that we do that is for the people who are having a little trouble waking up or just need a little bit of more information. I want to make sure that the information that I give is actually practical, useful. It's not just something interesting to think about, but something you can now take and do something with that will create change in your life. And so this algorithm, which I've alluded to over and over, I'm going to speak openly tonight. And now tarot talk is really cool too. The rise of the Proletary. What this is the second piece, which I haven't revealed, of the spread, the working. The spread is a divine order, and it's a way for you to, which we've actually looked at in the March of the Courts. The March of the Courts is one half, and then the other half is the rise of the Proletary. Now, what this is referring to is the difference between the courtship and the lower, right? The upper and the lower world. And so that's what we're going to be talking about now, is to how do we take this spread that we have, that we can use for our lives right now. The spread that I'm talking about here, like for instance, this is the spread for the day of my birth, and this is very insightful into my story. This is the beginning and the end of my story in the lower realm of the descent. And now what we're going to talk about today is the opposite of this, the higher realm, where my higher self is, my you know, our true self, our soul. That's where the soul resides, and that is to translate, unlock, but translate the language of our soul. Our soul is always talking. There's never a moment our soul isn't speaking to us. And it's hard to hear sometimes because of the din of the world in our minds and our hearts and our pain. And if we can quiet that and listen with the ears to hear, we will open that communication. And so what the idea of this spread is this is who we are here. And the other piece, which I'm going to talk about tonight, is the idea of the voice of your soul and what it's trying to say to you. And so this is the completed version of those two things together tonight. Okay? And if that's the march of the quartz, we're going to talk about the rise of the Proletary. Okay? And these are words that I chose. These are names that I derived throughout the years of me developing this system. And these two spreads put together are so powerful that they will, in some cases, just through the working of your first time with it, wake you up to the truth. Just in the working of the spread. Brianna, good to see you. Thanks for popping in. It's so great when I see names I recognize and I kind of feel like a connection. It's just awesome. You guys are great. Meet the quartz. Now, I talked about the deck, right? And we've looked at the deck many times and we saw the pieces. And so there's these elements that are part of the deck, right? And then there's these suits, basic cards, which are include the different ideas of listening, speaking, rejecting, and lamenting. And then we have, the key, right? These are the two keys. And then we have the suits. Now, the suits are the court cards. These are the court cards. Each one is associated with a court card. For instance, this is the Pentacle of Lament. Right? It almost looks like it's crying, doesn't it? Doesn't it look sad? Like it won't open its mouth, like it refuses to speak because it's turning away. Isn't that something? Well, one of the court cards is this card right here. Okay? This is the cup of rejected. Wanting to give, but not being allowed to. The cup of rejection. The sword of rejection, or rejected. Right? This is rejection. This says no. This is a choice to say no. This is the passive no, and we're going to talk about that. I've spoken about it on the stream here. This is the cup of reception, right? And so we have the suits, and there's 16 total, right? There's 4 suits, essentially, and then there's the 4 states, the states being listening, speaking, rejecting, and lament, okay? And so now when you look at these, it's like, okay, I understand. And you've made a very bold statement several times, right? I've made the statement that this deck contains the totality of human knowledge. It contains the entire tarot, the entire Bible, the entire Quran, the entire Torah, the entire Kabbalah. It's all here. All of physics, all of mathematics, all of nature, all of evolution. It's all here. And so how can I make that statement when I can't even point out the small cards? Where are the small cards, right? And so we're going to talk about that in today's Meet the Quartz. Those who've been to the channel know the small cards have another name. And that name is very, very, very closely related to the March of the Quartz. The story of the creation of you. And also the story of the creation of the universe. And so it is the bestowal of the physical, the spiritual into the physical, becoming physically manifest, right? And so we know what the small cards are. They're the physically manifested advisors, right? It's 36 of them total. And then we're going to talk today in Our Beautiful Soul about the Divine Lament. God crying. And what that means. And why it's important to our lives. So, a lot of fun, but a lot of truth. Because normally, people come to a tarot reader or an advisor or a guide for answers. Answers are the same as the question. Answers are right or wrong. There is no truth in the light. The light shows you everything, so you have to decide what's true and what's false. So there is no truth in answers. right? So the question and the answer are the same thing. They're like two sides of the same coin, and they have a different opposite. That opposite is truth. The opposite of a question is truth. The opposite of an answer is not a question, but truth. Ladies and gentlemen, His Royal Duliness is in the building. And so I just want you to consider what I said. What is the opposite of a question? Is it an answer, or is it the truth? Questions and answers are the same thing, and the opposite of both is truth. Every two has a third. What we're discussing today is a very kind of deep concept of the idea that every two has a third. What's the opposite of love? Well, hate. No. I mean, it seems intuitive, obviously. I want you and I want you away, or I want to help you or I want to hurt you. These seem like opposite ideas, are they? Okay, I guess. And that implies that there is a two-ness. The two-ness comes from the fact that there is some connection to where these things are opposite. There is this concept that they're not exactly the same. However, if we consider what I talked about as far as every two has a third, and we turn that into a coin, love and hate, what's the opposite? Indifference. I couldn't care less. So you understand, right? What we have here is the idea that all opposites have an actual third opposite that gives it context, and that context is the pointer toward the truth. There's a profound understanding there when you apply it to different circumstances, and you'll see how it's popped up all over. I started, I joke, but it's actually kind of changed my life a little bit. I started taking notes. Whenever I've done lectures or training, believe it or not, I bring my tools and the diagrams, but I stream of consciousness. I don't plan. I don't write. And I started doing that just a couple of streams ago, and it was a great experience for me. So I took notes, and I just want to review the notes. So, you know, there's a name for these two different types of thinking. The two different modes, the ascent and the descent, okay? Another way that you could speak these words is, and I suppose that there's a sort of poetic nature to it. There's a lot of ways that you can put this. Coming and going, departing and arriving. There's a lot of different words for that. But one of the words that I like, because there's a certain implication to it, is estrangement. The descent is estrangement. And ascent is restoration. Estrangement and restoration. Now, those two things sound like opposites. Apartness, togetherness. But what I want to talk about is the third. Because what I've been speaking about is the idea of every two has a three, and although they're opposites, there's this third thing that's related, that's the actual truth. Those two have a truth that defines it. And so estrangement, separateness. Restoration, togetherness. It implies that there was an apartness and now there's a togetherness. And what is the opposite of those two things? Never having been apart to begin with. The opposite of estrangement is not return. It's never having been apart. And so that's the third. Every two has a third, right? I want you to consider that, and consider different places and times in your life where you are faced with a decision or unsure about something. Ask the question, mull over the answers, and then rather consider, here's my question, here's my answer. Those two things are opposites. That's fine, but they're really one thing, and what is the opposite of those two things? What's that one that's the opposite of those two? What is the opposite of poor and rich? The opposite of poor is rich, right? Okay. What's the opposite of poor and rich? I'm going to throw that out to the chat. See if we can kind of get into this mode of thinking of every two has a third. The opposite of poor is rich, but there's something else that's the opposite of both of those things. Content. Okay, is it sinking? It's a great concept, and the more you think about it, the more you'll find the ideas. And the ones that are close but not right will ring, and then if you think about them, you'll see that it's close, but the idea is very profound. And it's important because we can't lose sight of what we're trying to realize here. The goal of this work is not just to understand the tarot deeper, which this will do, or studying the cards from the respect of the system of the deacons and the march of the courts is a very profound way to get a sense of what the tarot is actually teaching us, what it's actually trying to do. You can approach it from the respect of the lower world experience. It's an important tool for that. I mean, we are navigating this world right now until we do some work to decide if or when it's time for us to ascend willfully. But until then, we got bills to pay, we got work to do, we have friends to entertain, we have enemies to avoid. You know, like there's life happening from our respect, from the lower self, profane mind. And so, we have to do what we can to avoid suffering, and we do what we can to increase. I needed some marshmallows. I totally get that. It's hot chocolate season, people. No, you can always go back though and catch up. It's no. But that said though, so the idea here is that anytime you have a two, there's a third. Anytime you have a two, there's a third. Okay. And so I'm just going to peruse here again. And so let's look at like mathematically what that means. Because this is, another thing that I said, and it was a bold statement, is the idea that this can be used for all this different knowledge systems. I can apply it for mathematics, I can chemistry, quantum mechanics, which I'm going to touch too. I'm going to explain a very important concept of why physics can't answer the question of how time didn't exist before the Big Bang. How is that possible? Well, I have the answer. I'll tell you tonight. If there's any physicists listening, pay attention. This is the answer to the grand question. And it's using this, and it's once you hear it, you're gonna be like, oh, duh. So the point of this is I'm not here to teach any of you anything. I'm here to convince you that you've always known, so you remember. I'm just here to remind you. And since we're the ones who spoke the Big Bang into the universe, we just have to remember how it went down, and we can easily remember what happened before it. We lived it. So, let's look at the elements. Let's look at the aces. Listening, speaking, rejecting, lament. Okay, let's put this over here. Now, this is, for instance, and I kind of touched on this in the last stream, or maybe the one before. It was the idea, basically, of the fact that there is a system of psychology built into this. You can use this as a device for interrogating your mind in order to get a perspective on your psychological vocabulary. Uncle is in the house. What's going on, Uncle? Thanks for popping in, man. So, to reiterate, every two has a third. So every opposite has a third that gives context. So let's look at something here. Let's put ourselves in the state of listening to lament Or is that an opposite? And that's not an opposite, I don't think. However, an opposite of lament would be speaking. Speaking and lament, right? Talking and not talking. Why? Because you've been denied. And you're in a state of sorrow over that denial. Speaking and lament. Okay, so what we have is bestowal and sorrow. Like giving and the pain of loss. So now, this is the idea of someone saying, here, have this, and this is the idea of saying, I can't take it. And what you can look at as an opposite of these two things, of the bestowal and of not taking, is always having. Never not having. Never being in the necessity to give or receive. So the lament doesn't exist. It's the opposite of lament, but it's also the opposite of speaking, since there's no necessity to speak, since you already have, and there's no necessity to cry. This is the state of have. These two are opposites, so to speak. And then the third is the state of have. Okay? It's another example here. Speaking and rejecting. That's another biggie, right? That's the obvious one. Hear me. No. No, really, I have something to say. Don't care. What we have here is the opposite, right? Wanting to be heard, refusing to hear. Wanting to be heard, refusing to hear. These two things are opposites, but there's a third thing, and that third thing puts these two things into context. I'd like to ask the room, I'm not sure exactly how long the delay is on YouTube. I have to check the stream here to see, but that's an interesting question, right? What is this? What does speaking imply? The desire to bestow, to want to give something. And what is rejecting? Refusing to accept. Refusing to accept is accepting loss. The opposite of speaking is silence. So what this refers to is humility. Wow, big fire in Cali. Yeah, bad internet. Well, I'm going to keep the stream up, and so if you do miss anything, obviously you can go back and watch it. But do you see where that comes from? Humility. The desire to give, the refuse to receive, are two sides of the same coin. And that third piece is humility. Happy to receive. Not in a state of bestowal. There's a lot of other concepts related to this idea, and so I just wanted to plant that seed. I mean, we are trying to grow a garden of pomegranates, of course, and you can't grow a garden of pomegranates without planting seeds. It's interesting, too, I just have to kind of say, you know, the naming system was also channeled. It just kind of came to me through being open to the process and, you know, working through it. And even looking back, you know, I am nowhere near, not even close, not even an iota the same person I was 20 years ago. And yet the 20-year-ago person invented this. And now looking back at it, it's interesting because I don't look at it like that. I look at it as something I discovered, like I discovered the DuQuette deck, or I discovered the Tarot of the Abyss, you know. This is just another discovery. This was channeled. I am not the source of it, and I wasn't then either. But that said, the naming system is just quite beautiful. I mean, really, to consider the accidental poetic beauty of a cup called the Cup of Reception, or, you know, the Pentacle of Lament. There's really a beautiful poetry to the language that's that was accidental. It was just the name based on the you know, the elements came first. These elements came first, and so just a beautiful poetic point of view I wanted to share. But so that said, you understand, there's whenever there's two, there's a third. And that's very profound with respect to the Inner Sanctum, right? Because what did I talk about last night? What I talked about last night is and when I shared my experience of scrying the tree and actually approaching the abyss and seeing that beast and realizing the truth, that beast, you know, and went through the process together. And basically, so the idea here is that there is the idea of the two, the opposites, but the truth, the reality is that those two opposites are actually the one thing, like two sides of the same coin, that have another opposite. So, you know, when you are able to kind of have the perspective of both at the same time, which is what we're trying to do here, it just comes to you. And so, you know, don't forget, the whole purpose of this being made is to help people to elicit the experience of soul talk, communicating with your higher self directly, lucidly. And it's also good as a tool to look into the, you know, the current circumstance that we're in as well. It's also good to, for instance, apply it to the Bible, apply it to other books. Like if you're reading something very heavy in Crowley 777 or Book 4 or something, you know, very heavy in Magic and Theory and Practice that you just can't really wrap your head around, apply the algorithm. It's really amazing. What's this thing I'm looking at? What's its opposite? Like, think about, even if you don't know the opposites right away, look up a word in one of the books that you're unclear about. You know what? There's some, how about Hermes? Let's go. Kabbalion, Hermes, you know, the Emerald Tablet, okay? I'm just going to crack it open. This is totally random. Doctrine. The word doctrine. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the opposite. We're going to put them together, and then we're going to see that third opposite, and it's going to give insight into what doctrine means. The algorithm works for everything. It's universal. Every two has a third. Doctrine. What is doctrine? An agreed upon, set forth standard of ideas that is utilized as a system of, or a framework for a body to maintain its form. All right, is that a decent definition of doctrine? I think so. What's the opposite of that? No body of knowledge. No group. Right? No rules. Anarchy. The opposite of doctrine is anarchy. And so there's a third. And that third is balance. The middle of the scale. Each of the two are here, and in the middle is the point that tips them. You've seen this symbol over and over again in your lives. And it's a beautiful, holy symbol, and it actually is very important because the point became the line. And that's two. That's the first point where God actually became self-aware, not just aware. And that is the cross, right? The two, the one and the two. This is a good symbol, however. Well, not necessarily neutral, but yeah, close, yeah. It's more the idea that the two things that you think are opposites are never opposites. They're actually the same thing, looking through different sides of the abyss. The cross is good, except it should have broken arms so that it can tilt As above, so below. As below, so above. So the arms tilt, and then they can go into the middle, which is the truth, the third. Every 2 has that 3. So consider this as the 3 state. This is the truth state. As above is one of the lies, so below is the other lie, and the middle one is the truth state. So this represents truth. It doesn't represent Christ being nailed to a cross and being murdered in front of people. What it represents is the idea of the fact that those arms aren't tilted as above, so below, as below, so above. There is no as above, there is no so below, there is no upper tree, there is no lower tree, there is no upper world, there is no lower world, there is no inner sanctum. You never left. There's nowhere to return to. You're already there. So that idea is that middle, right? And how do we uncover that? We uncover that with the algorithm. Every 2 has a third. The opposite of doctrine is anarchy. The opposite of both of those is balance. When you're balanced, you don't need a doctrine, and anarchy won't happen. What is balance? We're going to get there. Because let's do apply the algorithm to the word balance. And now you're talking, okay? Do you get that? I'm not going to give you the answer to that, but apply that every 2 has a third to the word balance. Keep working it out, and you will come to a single answer. And every time you apply the algorithm several times, you will come to the same answer every time. And that same answer is the truth. What I just spoke is the truth told openly. Do the work. It's not that hard. Has anybody ever seen these people on the internet that can speed a Rubik's Cube? Right? Like these people who can do the speed records for a Rubik's Cube. It's really something to watch, especially the ones that do it one-handed blindfolded. That is something else. Why? Because they remember the algorithm. Forward, left, down. There's a special algorithm, and there's a maximum number of steps. And you can do it in that number of steps. You can hand it to a child and give them the sheet and say, follow these instructions, and you can solve any Rubik's Cube on the planet. It's been decoded. And the people who go through the steps of memorize it can do it super fast. And the point is that they can take, now here's the point, no matter what state that Rubik's Cube is in, they can apply those steps and will eventually fall on the solved cube. It's the truth. Look it up on YouTube. That's great. I think Numberphile did a great video on it. It might have been Numberphile. Brady. So consider that, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. Only you could use this algorithm. You could use this specific one to solve basically anything. It's just your ability to be able to see the differences between things you think are opposite, remember that they're the same, and then find out what that third is. Okay? And now you keep applying that. So first we had doctrine, which is a random word I picked out of a book, and then we chose the second word, which I consider to maybe be the opposite of doctrine, which is anarchy. And then if we take those two things and consider them the same, you have this beautiful idea that balance destroys the necessity for either. And so the truth is, with balance, you don't need doctrine. With balance, you don't need to fear anarchy. Now, so balance. So we're going to apply that word to balance. And then that's going to give us the third word. Apply that word and so on. And do that a number of times until you find it will ring. You'll feel it here and here and here and here. The whole thing. You're going to kind of know you found it. And that word is like, is going to wake you up to some truth. And now you apply that to all of your work. Now, sometimes you just want a burger, go have a burger. You don't have to ponder the creation of the burger. But there's many times in our lives that we bump into circumstances that little insight would give us a whole different perspective and change and reduce suffering. The fact is suffering is part of physical reality. But we can reduce it to its minimum. And we can destroy it. That takes us one extra little step. And so that's kind of the gist of what I'm getting at here when we're talking about all of these concepts. Is there an opposite between the if we just look at the traditional tarot, right? We have the cup and we figure the cup. What's the opposite of the cup? I guess it's the wand or the sword, or, you know, and like have that conversation. Think about it and say, okay, which ones are the opposites? And now let's consider them the same. I live under the thinking that the sword and the cup are the same thing. It's just a little energy flow up and down between the heart and the mind, heart and mind, heart and mind. And whose heart and mind, right? But they're really kind of like a counter-rotating thing, mind and heart, mind and heart. One fuels the other. And which one we decide to be the giver and the receiver makes a big difference, right? And so if heart and mind are the same thing, what's the opposite of that? What's the opposite of feeling and thinking? Knowing. What's the opposite of reception and bestowal? Having. Right? These are big deals. Every two has a third is somebody called Douglas Adams. It's the answer to life, the universe, and everything. There it is. 42. 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 is the unification reflected into two-dimensional reality. In 3D, it's an 8. So it's really a beautiful thing. And if we consider that, and let's look at, and this is where I'm going to end this. Anybody with any questions, contact me. I'm sharing for free. And you have any questions about what I'm really, just call me up. We'll talk. One-on-one. We'll have a chat. Every one of these elements can be considered that way. So then you have to kind of think about the holographic number of elements that you're looking at here. Because what it winds up doing is that we take these elements and then they wind up reducing. Because we have essentially the idea of speaking and listening are opposites. Speaking and listening are opposites, right? So we're going to take speaking and listening, and we're going to say, okay, they're opposite, but if we look for the third, what's the third? The third is the idea of not having to speak. There not being necessity to speak. Therefore, there's no necessity to listen. So they're really just together. And there's another word for that. Knowing. Knowing is the idea of not needing to speak and necessity for listening not being formed. There is no listening needed, and there is no desire to speak because you know. And so the idea is that now there's another card that's been born, right? There's a new card. That new card, well, there's a couple of new cards, right? Each time we combine and find a third, there's a card that is invented that gives us insight into the particular situation that we're looking at. And so that is the algorithm. What we're eventually talking about is the application. This is the applied algorithm, not the algorithm with respect to how it's applied to the reading of the March of the Quartz or the Rise. This is a totally different circumstance. Okay? And now the power that comes from that is up to you. And the real enemy here is mental laziness, right? It's the idea of us working through the fact that sometimes it takes us a minute to figure it out, and we have to be able to work through that where we don't get the satisfaction of the wow moment that you know. That is very motivating. In fact, there's been a lot of studies done that show that when we have those moments, there's a temporary up to 15 to 20 point boost in IQ. Aha! Your IQ is boosted up to 15 to 20 points for a short period of time. And so those moments are powerful, but when you're not in those moments, you have to be able to have the strength to work through not being motivated. Have the strength to work through not seeing success. And recognizing that you're doing the work. It's okay. You can't judge the haircut halfway through, right? I mean, and so that's what we're talking about here. And that algorithm is going to come in very useful when we start talking about where are the small cards in the Divine Lament. These are big. This is a big deal. I'm just going to review my notes. I think, again, I got most of what I wanted to speak about there. You have the 4 turning into 12, right, through the holographic. The 2 has a 3. Estrangement, restoration. That's good. Yeah, I like taking notes. It really is something else. Yeah. That's that. Okay. Yep, I think that's everything there. Okay, so. Wow. I'm just going to pause real quick and ask, does everybody have any questions about what we just talked about, or how's that feel to you? Like, I'm just going to sit back and see, like, how's that feel? Let's make it a conversation before we move on to the Proletary and to the small cards and the Lament and so on. And, you know, to be clear, this technique is not just for soul talk. It's not just for entry into the inner sanctum. This is for interrogating your universe under any circumstance. Black and white, those are opposites. Definitely. But they're actually two sides of the same coin, and the opposite is color. Okay, well, color. Color has an opposite. What's the opposite of color? Black and white. Okay, so black and white and color are the same thing. Interesting. And so, if black and white and color are the same thing, what is the opposite? Frequency. They're all just seeds of each other under different emotional states. That's all they are. There is the original hydrogen atom, and it's the only one that exists. All the rest are just reflections of it from someone's perspective. How it split a bunch of different ways is all just an illusion of that one that saw a 2 in the mirror and thought there was 2. It's actually just looking at itself. And it all rolled from there. And so that's the gist of what we're talking about here, is that, you know, Trinity is a special number on purpose, right? Every religion has its Trinity. Isis, Osiris, Horus. Salt, Mercury, sulfur. Fire, water, air. You know, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. You name it. There's something to that. And when you think about why the 3, it dawns on you a little bit, the fact that it's actually intrinsically automatic. It's born at the same time 1 is. As soon as 1 is born, there's this concept that 1 has to exist somewhere. We're talking about lower realm. And so if it has to exist somewhere, there's a place exists, which is the place and then the thing. So immediately when that 1 is born, remember the planets came first. Space was ripped into existence in order to give the planets a place to live. That 1 was born, and so a 2 needed to happen to give it somewhere to be, a place to occupy. And then once the 2 occurred, the 3rd was born because it was the opposite of the opposites. And so 3 is really just 1. 3 equals 1. 1 equals 3. 3 equals 1. 1 equals 3. Okay, you see that? Every 2 has a 3rd, and those 3 are one idea. Okay? It's not big, spooky, occult symbols. This is a symbol for the algorithm. Every 2 has a 3rd, and every 3 is a 1. That's it. There's the 6. There's the 8. Okay? This is also an 8. 6 points, and then the point in the middle is actually 2 points in 3D space, right? When you're looking at this, what you're looking at is 6 points. It's 1 stroke, right? And then there's a point in the middle up here, And there's a point in the middle down here. And so there's actually, there's 8 points on this. This is actually an 8, not a 6. Plus the 5, which is 13, which is 4. All right, so it's a beautiful mathematics that you're looking at right here. And what is 4? The birth of three-dimensional reality. 4 is the tetrahedron. The 2 tetrahedron together gives us the Merkaba. Right, that's what we're looking at. There's 8 points on that. Okay? Just a different perspective. That's all we're talking about. I'm curious if anybody's ever bumped into this idea. There's a fly buzzing around. So if you see me swatting around, it's true. It's me. I'm actually swatting something. I'm curious if anybody has in their studies bumped into this concept of every 2 has a third, because I haven't. And again, I know I can't be the only person to have thought of this, but I feel like it's never been communicated to me. I've never been able to find this idea. I mean, there is the idea of duality, and there's the idea of polarity and these things, but nobody ever talks about the third. And the third is the thing that just unlocks the whole idea of the Kabbalistic system. The trees aren't real. We never left the inner sanctum. We never left the abyss. We never descended. None of this is ever happened. It isn't happening. It's all in the divine mind. And so what that means is that we can let go of the stuff that we think is part of this lie, and recognize who we really are. That's really the goal of what we're trying to do here. Just recognize who we really are, which is you or I. You am I am you. We are it. So, that said, the rise of the Proletary, what we're talking about here is we've all seen the spread. And I've discussed the spread many times. It's a really cool story that I tell in order to kind of to remind you of how to lay the cards out in the divine order. There's a reason the ones are at the top, they're on the bottom, why these 3 deacons line up, in that everything has a specific kind of order to it. And you'd figure, okay, well, there's 10 positions, and so it must be related to the tree of life, and you're correct, but there's also another reason that there's 10. And also the fact that I haven't revealed all of this spread, which the second half of this is the black and white version, which we're going to talk about today. And that's the rise of the Proletary. And the Proletary is really a term for the lower people. The courts are the higher people. And one of the defining factors of the Proletarians is the fact that they have no possessions. Their value is not in the stuff they own, it's in what they do. Like their value is in that they work. And so if they don't, they're worth nothing. Whereas somebody who's wealthy cannot work, but they're still valuable, right? That's the idea of the court and the Proletary. So basically, it's divine mind manifest in the physical world as profane. So it was walking the profane path. Christ wasn't rich. Muhammad wasn't rich, right? Buddha was rich, but then got poor. He did both. Buddha did a lot. Buddha got it. The lesson of temperance is not to deny yourself pleasures. It's to enjoy them in balance so that you can experience them to their fullest, so that you're not missing anything. Alcoholics have no idea how to enjoy alcohol. They're too busy binging on it. And so, you get the idea. And so what we're going to talk about is that. And there's a couple of very interesting sort of dynamics here that how this all kind of plays into this idea. And the thing, and the reason that it's named "Where Are the Small Cards" is because I talked about specifically that this, I claimed this, you can use it to unlock everything, anything, doesn't matter. Somebody was playing the song Imagine today, and I was listening to the lyrics of Imagine, thinking about this deck and what cards as the lyrics are being spoken. It's going to unlock every song ever written. And you can get the actual full meaning of it. And then once you have that, apply the algorithm, and you know what is being spoken. Just the song Imagine. Right? Okay, this fly is really getting frustrating. But that said, so we're going to discuss that too. And we're talking about what actually is this? Is it a tarot spread? Well, yes, it is a tarot spread, but it's actually a lot more than that. What it is, at the end of the day, is a reenactment. It's a ritual reenactment of your creation using the courts as the actors, as the players in the play. That's like literally what's happening here. And so now we can't see the full picture if we don't see it from our perspective. And our perspective includes the upper and the lower perspective. We can't get the full view of what's going on here if we're looking at it just from our side, because remember, every 2 has a 3. We have to find the opposite of this. Go through that process of the work, and then find that third. The third is the truth. Forget about answers. There are no truths in answers. Answers are the same as questions. They're 2 sides of the same coin. What we're looking for is truth, right? Answers stop us from asking. Answers stop us from seeking. Answers are the most dangerous thing in a spiritual path. Answers are great when you're doing homework. Answers are great when you're playing Jeopardy, with your buddies. And, there's a 6-pack on the line. But answers don't actually show you anything else. Because they're the same as the question. So that said, I'm going to step out for just a moment, and then we're going to continue with Meet the Courts. And we're going to discuss the idea of where are the small cards. You're telling me that the whole tarot's in here, and I don't see them. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. I hope you stick around. We'll see you in a minute. I love everybody who comes in here every day. You're the best. And I'll see you soon. Alrighty. So, what we're talking about here is where are the small cards? Right. So in the traditional tarot, we're very used to the fact that there's different types of card. There's small cards, there's the aces, the princess or the page, and what I call the small courts, right, which is actually the higher ones, but really the as we all know, the princess or the page rules the show, right? We look at this wheel here, and it's pretty obvious that the princess, which is the one that rules the entire period of time in a season, right? She rules that whole season, rules the show. And these are, as far as I'm concerned, the lesser courts, right? And they have a different role in the story, right? And their role is to actually go through this experience of marriage and loss and all these things, and due to that, some things happen, right? And then the deacons come into play. And so the deacons are obviously a very important part of this work. They're a very important part of this system. And so, you know, how can the deacons be so important to the system and they're not in the deck? I mean, there's 36 of them. And, you know, if you consider each sign, if we look at the wheel here, each sign, like for instance, right now we're in Libra, has 3 deacons associated with it. So, I mean, it's even, each month has 3 deacons. So clearly there's some kind of importance to them in the system of tarot. Not to mention the fact that they're the only really physical manifest part of the tarot, to be honest. You know, we've learned a lot of this process of what comes from where, and so if you consider that, the only thing that, if we look at this ring, that's actually physically manifest, there we go, is everything that's inside of the second white ring. The outer white ring with the princess and the knights, and then the exaltations, and then you have the planets themselves, which are real, but then you have this ring of the wheel that those planets are up against, right? How they move, and then we have the deacons, which are represented by, for instance, the planets associated with each deacon, and that associated with the sign gives you the knowledge of how to read the card, right? Like the 7 of Cup is essentially Venus in Scorpio, whereas the 5 of Cup is Mars in Scorpio, right? You get the gist. And the wheel is useful, right? Because you can see Venus is green, so anywhere you see green in the inner wheel, Venus is an influence. That's here, right here. You can very quickly glance and see Mercury is orange, so you can see all the Mercuries and whatever the case. And this is where you're actually getting... what this is the identity, and what this is the personality of each deacon. Another way to look at that is the idea of the deacons themselves have wisdom to bestow upon the queen, right? We've talked about this story many, many times, right? So with the idea of the queen, in this case, the Queen of Swords, is the past queen, right? So let's tell the story. And as we go through this, I'm going to tell the story again, only using slightly different words. And I have my notes for that. So I'm going to put them down, and you're going to see me looking down at notes, which is rare. Usually I just stare out into space when I talk. I have this like empty space right here, so I just kind of, and it's shadowy back there because I have a ring light staring at me, so I'm staring at dark, and so I just kind of stare into space when I talk. When you just see me doing this, I'm looking into space. But now I'm going to be looking down at my notes. So, and the idea, the story is a little different than I've told it before. It's the same story, the same order, but I'm going to use different words than I've normally used, right? I'll say, so first, there's the prior queen, right? And the prior queen, we'll talk about at the end. Why? Because she's in the beginning. So, suddenly, there was this princess. She just emerged out of nowhere. And she was minding her own business. And then suddenly this knight came around and said, hey, I think I like you. And she's like, I think I like you too. And he's like, well, hey, maybe we can get to know each other. And she's like, well, you know, I don't know, I'm kind of picky. And he's like, well, I can win your love. And she's like, okay, well, all right. Well, I'll tell you what, if you do, I'll give you my gift of my element. Oh, wow, I appreciate that. That's awesome. Okay, well, I'm definitely going to do that. And so what do I have to do? What's the trial? You have to beat my 3 trials. 3? Why? Everything is always 3. First, you have to beat justice. Then you have to beat death. And then you have to beat temperance. All right, if we go to the wheel, just to be clear, what we're looking at here is this period of time. This is my birthday. And so what we're talking about is this period of time right here that extends out and this whole story begins with that Queen of Swords, right? And this princess was the one that emerged and started the whole thing, okay? And so we're just looking at this period of time that is encompassed in that 10 of Wand energy in this period of time right before the equinox there, okay? Now, if you consider that, and we look at this spread, those are the 3 majors relevant to that period of time. Let me jump back to the wheel here. Relevant to that period of time, right? Where is she coming from? Right? And what are the majors in this situation? Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius. So what are we looking at in the March? Justice, death, temperance. Okay. Yep. Okay. The prince crushes it. Of course. Now, she bestows her gift. And so now when she bestows her gift, the reward for the trials to the prince, something very special happens. She has fulfilled her duty. She came from a faraway land. Nobody even knows where she came from. She just showed up. And she became instantly the target of the night. So, that said, she becomes queen. Why? Because she has fulfilled her goal. She's achieved the goal of descent, which is to bestow her element onto the world and make it manifest physically, which she did so through the night. And because she's queen, and they did consummate, if you recall, he becomes king. Now, unfortunately, in a short period of time, the king passes away. And in her grief, the queen consults with a council of deacons. And the council of deacons are there to advise her, if I can find the right button, and give her guidance, since she has to contend with the memories of her beautiful past, of this love that she had, and the loss of her mate. Now, don't forget, they consummated. And so each one of these deacons imparts upon the queen their wisdom, and it makes her greater. And through each deacon's advice being imparted into the queen, it makes her greater. She's able to turn her lament for her husband into a state of bestowal. And in doing so, gives birth to the new prince. So that's the story, right? Now, she then becomes the past queen. So she would now, in the next rung of this reading, because again, what we're talking about here is the idea of the creation of the universe. The Queen of Pentacles there would essentially move to the front of the reading, and you would lay out the cards for the next period of time if you wanted to read it in order. If you wanted to just tell the saga, you could do that this way. Okay? And that's how this works, right? And the reason that I say that is that we now understand the deacons exist for one purpose, due to the lament of the queen. Without the lament, there are no deacons. And it's important to state as well, I'm glad I checked my notes. It's important to state as well that the queen departs the wisdom of the deacons upon her son. He has those qualities. So he is now the unified form of the King of Wand and the Queen of Pentacles in physical form. And he is the personality, the combination of the three deacons. The wise guys. Okay? That are there to oversee the birth of the new prince. So, okay? Now, at this point, the prince moves forward, passing on the story, moving toward the restoration. So that's the full story. We understand that now. The small cards, at least from the respect of this traditional tarot, are born through necessity due to the lament of the queen. And they pass their wisdom to the new prince to move the story forward toward restoration, i.e. reconciliation, i.e. ascension. It's the story of your creation. It's the story of your life, beginning to end. And how do I know the story of your life beginning to end? Because I lived it. How do you know the story of my life from beginning to end? Because you lived it. And we are at the end of time, looking back, waiting for ourselves to catch up. Who's talking right now? You are. So now what we need to do is we need to take this reading to get the real insight. And we need to make the two. Don't forget, as soon as a one appears, two is automatically born. It's just the way it is. And so there's that second. And that second is the same spread, but applying the divine order. And what is the divine order? It's right here. We have the code. All right. The divine order is right here. And we are talking about the descension reading. Okay, this is the descent. And so what we're going to do then is we're going to take out our calculator. Okay. And here's our calculator. And now we're looking at the descent. All right, so that's the one we're going to look at. And this is what we just read. So now we need to make that. Understood? So anytime you see that, put that there instead. Which, no change. Anytime you see that, put that. Big change. Anytime you see that, put that. Big change. Anytime you see that, put that. No change. Huh. Okay. All right. Any questions there? Because it can be, you know, it's at first it's like, what's the mechanical, dynamical, mathematical shenanigans going on? And it's like, you know, you just have to kind of look at the diagram. And so what this would mean is, in the lower world, anywhere I see a cup, I'm going to change and make that a sword. Okay? So anytime I see a cup, I'm making a sword, and then I'm going to turn it upside down. And now, why we're turning it upside down is because, and I don't read upside down meanings. I'm not turning it upside down to read the reversed meaning in the back of the little white book under reversed. What I'm actually looking for is the idea of, in this case, the idea of bestowal. All right, that's the state of the sword here. Right now, if we go get that sword. This is the Sword of Bestowal. Okay, you see that? It just happens to be upside down on the descent model, but it's, right? That's the Sword of Bestowal. And so anytime I see a sword, I'm going to reverse it, and it's going to become the Sword of Bestowal. Right now, wrong button. Right now, for instance, the Knight of Sword is a sword of reception. He is a sword, and how do I know that? Because he took the elements of the deacons. He received them through his mother. He's in a state of reception, but he's going to be changed to a state of bestowal. What is he bestowing? Well, we know what he's bestowing. He's bestowing something to the page to give birth to the next prince. So, okay, are we good? And so that idea is this code, and that's why I say order matters. The order matters. If this weren't right, what I just said wouldn't have worked. And it works around the whole wheel. Have fun, I promise, okay? And now, that wasn't built into the wheel, but it was. And this was not shared. I haven't found it anywhere. I've been studying this subject for a long time. So, right? And now, again, that's why I think it might be taught in, like, magical circles I'm not privy to as some type of secret or whatever, but I've never heard of it. And you know what? Even people who keep secrets reveal secrets, and so someone would have, I don't know. Sorry. In the beginning. No, so, okay. This is power right here. This is huge. This is the secret to literally your creation. Right? And we remember how to lay it out so that we have the key to the inner sanctum, where everything is lined up, it's perfect, it's beautiful, it's, you know. And so the math works, I promise. That said, because the math works and because we have this divine order, this story is real, it works. The fact is that this can be utilized to give you real knowledge, and that by applying what I just said, and this is the reason that my system, it does not insist upon, but it begs for 2 decks. Because the first deck is the color version of the reading, right? So you're going to go get all the cards that are relevant, and you're going to lay them out in the appropriate order in color, representing the lower world. Okay? And then you're going to get your black and white deck, which, again, I've made some recommendations, and if you guys have any ideas about that too, I would love to hear your ideas on a good black and white and a good color combination. Not just black and white and color, they have to work well together. And the 2 that I found that are the best so far, and it's going to be hard to change my opinion on this, but I welcome it, is Crowley's Thoth, which, I mean, you know, duh. In the annals of tarot, that is really gonna go down in history forever. This is it, because this was the revealing of the initial, a lot of secrets, right? Was the Thoth deck, and so the Thoth combined with the Hermetic, because the systems are similar enough that it's not like too contrasting in the symbolism, although sometimes that's a good thing, but you want to make sure you get a handle on the science first, and then you can go super basic. And you can literally just draw dots and lines only, and have a deck that is a dot, a line, a triangle, a square, and that's all you need, literally. And then, you know, there's different, like, little symbols you'd put, pluses, minuses, whatever, to get the idea of the positive and the negative, give and receive, whatever the case may be. Kind of the I Ching of tarot, by just using dots and lines. But it's the mathematics is different because it's a basically a 16-bit system. as opposed to I Ching, which is a 64-bit system. And what's the funny thing about that is that the I Ching is a simpler system, but it gives you more insight with respect to the lower world. You use the Tao to get to the higher. You use the I Ching to look at the lower, and then recognize that they're the same. The Tao has a beautiful statement. It's whether you're going up the ladder or down it, your position remains shaky. But if you stand on the ground on your own 2 feet, you'll never lose your balance. Tell me that's not talking about the tree of life. Whether you're going up the descent tree or down the ascent tree, there's tumult. But if you stay in the middle, which is where you are, where you were, where you have always been, you never left, then there's no issue. And so the Tao even taught this. And so the cards that I think go really, really nicely together as well, and this is the reason I'm going to bring these out is because, and I've mentioned it many times, we are moving into a feminine energy. I proved on last night's stream that God's a woman, right? Does anybody have any argument about that? Please email me if you want to argue that, because I'm gonna win that argument. But we're moving into a feminine energy, and so I chose 2 decks that are decidedly, markedly feminine, in a good way. Like, they're not overtly to a degree where it wasn't done elegantly or properly. And so this is another option of using 2 decks, a color and a black and white, for the purpose of doing the full. Well, I'll give you the name of the spread when I reveal the final piece on tomorrow. The third. Remember, every 2 has a third, and so the third piece. So the first one I use is the Hermetic Tarot, and the second one I use is Thoth. And very often, what I'll use is the large Thoth, which I now have out over here, right? It's the same deck, just bigger, right? So you get the gist. I'm not going to be doing that on a live stream because my desk space is small, but the space that I work in is much, 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 much larger, and gives it plenty of space to put like a whole. You could put a whole 2 decks out lined up and all this and it's really something to look at. You have to experience it that way if you have the space, and if you don't, make the space. What do you mean? You're alive. You're a sovereign being that makes decisions in their life. You telling me you can't move some furniture in your bedroom for a couple of hours to lay out a tarot deck on the floor and then put it all back? You have the will to do it. Just go move your stuff and you want a 6x6 space. That's not too much to ask for, to lay out a tarot deck and have a full 6x6 space in front of you to lay the whole thing out, sit down on the floor and get into it. That's the only way to know the deck. You get to lay out the full story from beginning to end in the standard order, which is, find the order, get all of the wands and do it in, ace through whatever, however you want to do it, and then do it in the divine order. Look at that, look at the clock, look at all different ways, and how lots of very interesting stuff and correlations come to you if you're able to go through that process of meditating upon these connections. And the second combination of the black and white, which I think is a really great for the upper lower world, is Tarot of the Abyss. Oh, cool, I have Justice on the bottom, right? So it's black and white, pen art drawn by Anatorian. It's a very sort of feminine energy deck, but not overtly, and the artwork is very good with respect to the symbolism. Look at the Ten of Cups. She made you a participant in the scene. Like, that's your hand, right? How great is that? She did that in a couple of cards. It's a really, really great deck. Yeah, I love that. Look at her 9 of Wand. Come on. So that's the Anatorian's Tarot of the Abyss. And go show her love. She's the best. Her art is amazing. She actually did a live stream of drawing one of these cards, and that's what made me want to get one. And I'm glad I did, because it's so powerful. And then the Light Seer. Or the... let me get the name of that right. Yeah, Light Seer. The Light Seer's Tarot. It's on the bottom there. Third from the bottom on the red. And so the Light Seer is color, but has a similar art style. So you'll see what I mean. You see how I chose these as combinations because their art style is similar. Now the two artists couldn't be more different. in their approach to the symbolism. Look at that Hanged Man. Talk about participating in the art. Look, you're hanging upside down. I mean, really. But it's still, it's line, cartoony kind of line art, and I love the coloring. It's so rich. It's like candy. Look at that purple. That actually shows up nice on the camera, on my, at least on my laptop it does. Which is gorgeous, right? And so these two together, this is the lower world deck. This is the upper world deck. Right? And so you could do that as well. And when I finally have this ready for production, I'm going to, oh wow, my Sword of Bestowal fell in my coffee. So now it has personality on the corner. When I have this ready for production, it's going to include a kit. And that kit is going to have 2 tarot decks, 3 pentacles in the appropriate order, and an instruction with the deacon map. It's going to have these 2 diagrams, and some guidance on numerological work with respect to some things. And there'll be other pointers to some of the things that we've talked about on the stream that are going to, in the box, unfold, and they'll be in here. So you can line this up in front of you, have the cards, and do the work with the client. If you're going to be using this as a tool to wake people up. If you're going to be using it as a tool for divination, which is fine, I'm not going to take insult to you using it as a reading tool, but it's not designed for that specifically. It's designed to wake you or other people up to the truth. However, because of its truth, because of its beauty of its truth, like the math is perfect. It can be used to unlock the Bible. It can be used to unlock, virtually anything. And I'm going to prove that in a minute here. So the idea is to apply the divine order to the vortex. Another word for this is the vortex. This is a representation of the result of the vortex, right? I've talked about the vortex before, and what the vortex is the idea of the fact that, let me jump to the elements go in an opposite direction than the natural order, and the march of the small courts compared to the princess is opposite, and these counter-rotating energies create a vortex that gives birth to physical manifestation. It's sort of the place of possibility. Okay, so the idea here is that, it's I'm going to grab it like a Bible verse or anything that you want to unlock or that you're having trouble gaining meaningful insight into can be unlocked through that process. What did I do with that box? These are great too, by the way. I get these from a couple different places, but these are great for storing tarot decks, especially if you're going to keep them together. All right, so you can put both of your color decks in here, or your color in a black and white, and you'll still have space in the middle for something else or whatever the case may be. But these are really, really handy for that. And they don't look so bad sitting on a desk, as opposed to, nothing against tarot boxes, but there's something about like all the words and the barcodes and other things that just it takes away from the experience for me, and I'm not a fan of it. Okay, so that's the idea that we're talking about. Let me check my notes and make sure that I'm not missing anything important here. This is a biggie. Oh, the small cards. Yeah, I just looked at the title and went, well, you didn't actually answer the question of where are the small cards, and let's talk about that. Is there anything else I want to talk about? That's going to be great. Here's the diagram that I drew for my notes for that reading that I'm talking about right now, right? So, yeah, here it is. Yeah, there's my handwriting. Someone grab a screenshot of that and go, what is he? I can't even read that. I had that problem my whole life. I remember when I was a kid, I used to come home with a note from the teacher about how bad I was because my handwriting was bad and whatever. I was a bad kid. Long story short, I used to have to write, I will improve my penmanship 1,000 times. And I've done that many times, unfortunately. Where I would draw a line down the whole page and then put the lines for the eyes. And then a big line, and then a big line, and then a bunch of V's to make the W's. And then a big line, and then dots. You know, like, it's any way you can speed that up. I forget how many I was able to get on a page, but I had it down to a science. And you know what? It didn't help. Parents, that shit doesn't help. Stop torturing your children. Yeah, that was a cute thing that I was thinking about doing. I guess I should talk about it because it's just fun. But, you know, the idea here, if you look at this system here, and the fact that basically the Queen of Pentacles becomes the new prior queen that carries the story and is the mother of the next prince. And so it's almost like an episode of like a radio serial, an episodic. It's like, and this is how I wrote it. In the last episode of the Creation series, we saw the princess, and the prince's eye got caught. The new princess from a far-off land. Stay tuned for the unfolding of the love triangle of the Aeon as we peek in on their story of love, loss, sorrow, and redemption. Join us next episode. Basically, so like every beginning is a continuation of the prior episode, and that's actually the case here. And what we can do is take this circumstance and not only look at, because I've talked about it on the stream here many times, your birth moment, but compare it to a love interest, compare it to a future date, compare it to a past date. There's all these different circumstances. Lauren, what's up? There's all these different circumstances where this can be utilized not just for the snapshot, but also to look at other things. But more importantly, what this working is doing is inadvertently programming you into understanding your own creation story. It's like once you go through this a couple of times and it dawns on you that you're talking about your own, and I mean the moment you were created, not when your body was born. That is in here though. But, okay? And like I said, your birthday, your birth is in here. Your birth exists in this deck, and you can see it if you have the eyes to see. Okay, it's in here just like the story of the tarot. And where are the court cards? These are the court cards. Each one of these is one of the courts. And so for you to lay out your story is actually not that hard. And now here's the question. The question is where are the small cards? Because we talked about the fact that the small cards were born out of necessity due to the lament of the queen. So where are they? They're in the heart of the queen. They're in the queen's cup. Where does the queen reside? The queen resides in the lower world of the descent phase. All right, so the queen's cup. She's in a state of reception, receiving the wisdom. She's in the state of reception, the queen's cup, receiving the wisdom of the three deacons, the wise guys. All right. So they live in her. And we know that. We see that. Now, we can also say that they live in the trumps. Every trump has three deacons. And so if you needed to know what deacons are associated with a period of time, you could look at this process here, and you can break this out into the 3 for the justice, 3 for death, 3 for temperance, because, you know, that's the trial. How does the knight battle justice? He fights justice's deacons. And each deacon is a different lesson that has to have justice applied to it. And so the working is very powerful, right? And there's different levels and different layers. There's the outer order. You know, read the story and you know your birth. There's the inner order, which you're referring to here is actually the manifestation of the small cards, which are qualities of you. Where'd they come from? These are the 3 personality building traits that you had to cope with through your 3 trials in order to create these traits of your lie, the self that you show the world. I told the story about, I was late for a test in 2nd grade and how that formed a whole personality that it formed my identity, right? And there's these formational moments that require the guidance of the deacon that, due to that, necessitate their creation, and they're born. And so that's where they live. They live inside the queen out of necessity for the lament. That's the secret, or that's the truth in secret. They are born out of the necessity due to the lament of the queen, okay? So just ponder that, because that's where the small cards live. And anytime you're doing a reading, you can easily see what those small cards are. Now, you may need to reference the wheel, and that's okay. So very easily what you would do if you wanted to reference the wheel to answer that question until you kind of get a feel. Let me pop open a new layer here. Okay, very good. What we're talking about is find your queen. In this particular case, we're the Queen of Discs. Right? And there are her deacons. Right? And so you could easily just do that, just reference this wheel, and you will have the answer that you're looking for with respect to, what are the small cards for the queen in my story. And there they are. And, you don't use the tarot definitions. That's not the point. We're using the idea of the energies of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars. We're looking at the energies of Sagittarius and Capricorn. In the tarot language, you're looking at the ideas of temperance and the devil. Or in the prior example, when we were in Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, we were looking at justice and death and so on. And so, but that's the gist here. So, because what are the small cards? But they're the advisors, meaning they install wisdom, meaning that they crystallize parts of your personality into your being. That's what they do. Although they're bestowed by, ultimately by the queen or the princess, they bestow back. And so that's the deal. And that creation story is not just the story, obviously, of your creation, but the creation of the universe. This is the creation of the universe. And ponder that, and I'll be talking about it again. And if there's any direct questions that are really burning you, give me, you can text me at the number, WhatsApp, email, whatever the case, and we can discuss that specifically. But that's where the small cards are. They're in there. They're in here. They're hiding in the queen. Now, which queen? I mean, what are we looking at right now, right? Right now, we were looking at my birth chart, right? And so let's look at which queen we're talking about here, okay? Because the queen, we're looking for the Queen of Pentacles. So we're gonna, it's gonna be a pentacle, all right? So let's grab a pentacle. I think it fell behind. Sorry. Yeah, remember that one that fell in my coffee? The others fell behind the cup. Okay. All right, so let's figure out which one of these is her. Okay, so let's just look at the spread here. We're looking at the Queen of Pentacles. All right, and the Queen of Pentacles is in the lower world. So we're gonna She's in the lower world. And we know here too that, like, okay, so Pentacle. And now we have to consider the state that she's in. What state is she in? Because there's a couple. She goes through a couple of states, right? So she actually goes in between some of these. When she first comes into the situation, she's a new lover, she's pregnant, she has a new husband, and things are great. And then suddenly she's alone, and everything is lost, right? And so she was in a state of reception, and then she winds up in a state of lament. So what she really is, she starts as reception, moves to lament, because she receives the prince, moves to lament. Lament requires a new reception, because she's attempting to bestow and isn't allowed, because her love is gone. There's no target of her bestowal. She's crying out to the emptiness, and finds herself in a state of lament. Now, is there ever a point that she is rejecting? The queen is never really in a state of rejection. There is rejection in the story, but not by her. And then we have the Pentacle of Bestowal, which is the idea of birth. Making divine manifest physically. Now there's a point before this where she is in the state of reception of the deacons, right? And then she bestows the deacons in the form of the prince. She receives them into herself and bestows them as the prince. So when we look at the reading and we see this idea here, the king goes away, the deacons are born, they install into her, and then she bestows. So there's reception and bestowal. Prior to that is the lament, which is the necessity for the reception to begin with. Lament is the necessity for reception. It's the attempt to bestow and the necessity for reception at the same time. They're two sides of the same coin. The attempt to bestow and the necessity to receive. No need to receive because you already have. The necessity to bestow is no need to give. This is the state of having. And this is the state of giving what you have. The state of having, lament, and reception, the opposites. Want to give and can't, and receiving is a kind of a beautiful combination. So that's the kind of the logic here of where the small cards are, where they're hiding, and how to locate the individual based on where they are in the story. Because as we progress, you could lay the whole thing out and look at it, and it's a pretty story. It's a kind of a neat way to do it, but you should really do it piece at a time, so that you start with the page, then you put the knight down. If you want to dramatically enact it, it's actually kind of useful that way. Have the knight come up, hey there, whatever, like go through the story. If you want to do the full trials, go get justice. Look at the wheel, grab the 3 deacons, go through the trials, which is mentally going through the process of applying the algorithm of every 2 has a 3. And as you go through that, the knowledge that's gained through this reading is so profound, you literally find the truth. And as you continually apply the algorithm to any reading, you eventually come to a conclusion which is the same and equal for everyone. This is the answer to every tarot reading in existence. after you apply the algorithm enough times, you're going to land on the truth, right? The truth. So and that said, that's where the small cards are. Let me check my notes. The second deck we talked about. Yeah, the real name of the spreads. Okay, yeah. So the real name of the first spread, the March of the Deacons. I mean, I guess I already alluded to it, right? I already said it. It's called the Estrangement. This is called the Estrangement, not the March of the Deacons. Okay? At least that's what I called it. I didn't know like I didn't use the word deacon. I had read the word decadent and I'd heard it when this all came about years ago, but I didn't call them deacons. But so anyway, but the idea of the or courts or any of that, I forget what I called the court cards back then. I don't remember, but you get the idea. Yeah, every beginning is a continuation of the prior episode, right? So that's the idea, too, of the Big Bang. That's one of the things that kind of answers the question of, you know, like what happened before the Big Bang. Is the idea that, like, every episode of this serial starts with the old queen. What happened before that? The old queen. The first sentence of this story is ... It's a continuation. There was no beginning. It's a wheel, not a line. So... Yep. No, that I got. Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I think I covered everything. Again, if anyone has any questions, particularly in that, you know, you can email, text, WhatsApp, carrier pigeon. It'll get to me, and we can consider that from that circumstance. So that said, you know, the importance of everything that we're trying to do here, and obviously the rise of the Proletary is the outer order name. The inner order name is you have on the one side estrangement, and on the other side is restoration. And then there's something that occurs, because don't forget, every 2 has a 3. There's the third. So. And that's, you know, the third part of this, what I call the final working. It's you've done the lower world work all the way down to the 3 deacons of each trial, and you've really looked at the situation, and you've got a handle on applying the algorithm and knowing what you're looking at. And then you've done the same thing with the upper world, and you understand that the dichotomy that is the nature of this work, using the divine order diagrams. To understand what you're looking at. The final working is another final step, and that final step is the culmination of the work with the intent of building the key, right? And that key is essentially not the answer to the question that you're seeking, but it's the truth of what you're seeking. There are no truth and answers. There just aren't. So, as far as the small cards are concerned, you know, that's an important question that when you, because what we're looking at ultimately, again, is we're looking at you, and we're looking at your personality. And so the purpose of doing that spread is to sit down with somebody that is a guide, that it would be trained in this system. And what I do and have done, and what hopefully those who are interested in learning this and applying it, is to get insight into these personality traits. These are you, and those different trials and how you have reacted to them will give us insight into what built up these false parts of yourself that need to go away. They're not helping. And your life will change forever. And it puts you closer to your true self, and then it kind of shifts you back on your path, and so you're kind of going back into the breeze of your momentum of karma, and so things just go, they breeze. So the question is, let's apply the 2 and 3. Every 2 has a third. So this question that just randomly popped up in the chat. Can I crack my eyelets? What is the opposite of that? Let's just consider the question. We're talking about, can I pass a test? Right? We're talking about passing a test. And so the opposite of passing a test is failing a test. All right, so we're talking about passing or failing. The opposite of passing is failing. Now let's look at those two things as one coin with two sides. One side says pass, one side says fail. And then there's a third thing that's the opposite of passing and failing. The difference, the opposite of winning or losing is not playing the game. All right? It's essentially saying, or the opposite of that would be controlling the game, so there is no game. Recognizing that it's not a game and you actually have control. So the answer to can you crack your eyelets is yes. And the way that you do that is either don't play the game or recognize that there is no game and you have full control of that circumstance. You know what it is that needs to be done. Just take the role of leadership. The answer is yes. It's not about passing or failing. It's about what it is you think you're going to get from that and ensuring that you get that thing whether or not you pass or fail. Okay, so I hope that made sense. Ditching finals. Amen, brother. That's a good opposite, right? That's a very poetic way of putting what I said. That's very succinct and beautiful. So you get the gist then. So yeah, that's the application of 2 to 3 in any circumstance. Am I going to pass? What's more important is how do I find joy regardless? How do I get what I want no matter what, whether I pass or fail? And how to get that is to align your will. What it is you're actually looking to achieve, because your will is pointed is where the energy goes, right? So important detail. You're so welcome. And that's the power of using the tarot from your mind without cards. By understanding the vocabulary, you interrogate the question without even needing cards. It's not about cards. It's about understanding the mechanics of soul talk. Because what do we just do? The fact is passing and failing is the lower world, but that third is the upper world. And that's not answers, that's truth. The question and the answer are the same thing. They're just two sides of the same coin. Answers don't give you anything. They're the same as questions. The truth is a third unique thing that gives the whole thing context, and it's the truth of what you're actually asking. Okay? So I'm glad you popped in with that question, because it allowed me to demonstrate the actual application of the algorithm in something that has nothing to do with, this is like lower world stuff, and you see how it applies to the lower world. This unlocks that whole system, but you get the idea, right? Okay, and so then, that said, we talked about a couple things tonight. We talked about the idea of the rise of the Proletary, which is essentially the opposite version of this whole spread, and I laid it out. I did it on the wrong screen. It was supposed to be here, but essentially what we're talking about is taking this reading, applying the divine order code breaker to these suits. Same thing with the reversals where it's necessary. Obviously, the wands aren't going to, if you're in descent, the wands are not going to turn, the pentacles aren't going to turn, but the cups and swords are. Do that. and swap the suits when necessary. Anything that's a cup, make a sword. Anything that's a sword, make a cup. Leave the wands and pentacles alone. Use the black and white deck. Read it. Okay? That is... now, why I call it the March... and not the march, but the rise, is because this is the idea of the ascended version, the higher world version of the descent line, right? The of the descent, right? So if you have these two out, this is the one we're referencing because this is the one we're questioning. And why are we questioning this? Because we are looking to receive the answer. We are in a state of listening. Listening is descent. Speaking is ascent. We hear from heaven. We speak to heaven, right? And so that's that. That's what we're talking about here. Now, on that note, we talked about every two has a third. So powerful. We talked about the rise of the Proletary, which is really just taking the reading of the March of the Courts and then applying the divine order and the algorithm. And you have the truth of the voice of your soul trying to speak to you. And that's not a figurative statement. That's literally what's happening. We talked about where the small cards are. Where are they? They are inside you. You're the queen. They were born out of necessity of the trials of your life. And what we need to do is give them names. And when we give them names, we can find their opposites. And when we find their opposites, we can find their third. And when we find their third, we find their truth. Does everybody understand that? This system will introduce you to yourself, your lower world self and your higher world self. Let's start with the lower. Who are you? And we'll discover that using these techniques. Then we do the work of walking you to the inner sanctum and opening that door. You walk through and you meet yourself for the first time. And I told the story of my walking through on yesterday's stream. So it works. It works. The bottom line is that this is the thing that virtually every culture has promised that they have access to and none have given. Every church has promised access and none have given. Every magical organization has promised and some have given. But it's hidden in secret and steeped in like deep esoteric poetic language that is so inaccessible that it might as well be James Joyce. I challenge anybody to read the first paragraph of Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce out loud. It's literally impossible. I mean, I don't even know what I'm looking at. And it's a beautiful psychedelic experience of words, and that's what it's meant to be. James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, is a brain psychedelic. Read those words, and it's just like, don't look at it for the context. Look at it for the beauty of the prose, because I don't even know what he's saying. And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? My GPA was... Really? You know what my GPA was? 0.16. Beat you. Mine was lower. I went to 19 days of my senior year of high school. I was a friend with the weed, and I was a friend with the trees, and I sat in trees and smoked weed. That's what I did. And I pondered everything I'm teaching you guys. It started then. It actually started, around that time. That some serious stuff started to dawn on me. And that led me on this really crazy path. But that said, it really began at 6. And one day, like I said, I'll talk about it. I'm going to look at my notes one more time. And then we're going to do the final segment. And, it's going quick tonight, actually. So we may have time to do some other fun stuff. But now we're getting to, You know, here it is. And like, just to be clear, if anybody went through last night and didn't awaken, and you need some help with that, I'm hoping that tonight's going to do that. And if not, then we'll keep working. Okay, just to be clear, the crossed knees, broken arms. I made sure I brought that one up. Yeah, should I talk about the Big Bang now or during the... Because I made some pretty bold statements about the deck here. You know, that, like, I made, but, you know, again, they're true. I made the statement that this divinely inspired piece of work that's taken 40 years to imagine and 20 years of actually knowing this and just having it in my head and using post-it notes and, like, little pieces of paper to do the work, I said some bold statements, like, for instance, it could be used to unlock all physics, all mathematics, all music, all theory, any observable human phenomena. And I mean that. It's a way to unlock the Bible. Let's look at, and then I'm going to get into the quantum mechanics, and show you a random Bible verse. It's random because it's based on the date, and my idea about quantum mechanics and solving a very, 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 very big question with respect to black holes, Big Bang. Stick around for that one. I just want to go through this first. This is a book that was given to me by a special person. I'll tell the story at some point. It's called My Utmost for His Highest, and basically it's a daily devotional. And you know, I'm not reading it for the value of the Christian message, although it is a pretty one. What I'm trying to do is to make everyone aware of the fact that this system can be used to unlock any knowledge. I don't care who wrote it, what the context was, and that includes not what is knowledge, but perceived phenomena that is given context. So any perceived phenomena that your brain gives context to could be unlocked with this system. So now let's just read today's. Today's September 25th. Or 26th. I guess we've passed the day. I wonder if I should read... Basically, okay, well, let's start with... The quote is Matthew 5:41. Let me... Can I squeeze this in here? Okay, Matt, I don't know if that's going to show up on the screen. There you go. Yeah, the go of relationship, right? Here's the quote. And whoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. The summing up of the Lord's teaching is that the relationship which he demands is an impossible one, and unless he has done the supernatural work in us. Jesus Christ demands that there be not the slightest trace of resentment. We talked about that, right? By combining the two is the third. Resentment is the third of two opposites. Think about which ones those are. Any trace of resentment even suppressed in the heart of the disciple when he meets with tyranny and injustice. No enthusiasm will ever stand the strain that Jesus Christ will put upon his worker. Only one thing will, and that is a personal relationship to himself. Who's talking right now? Let me get the cards out and let's talk about the Big Bang. Michael, how can this deck give you access to all this knowledge in just a couple of pieces of cardboard? And you think you're going to sit here and tell me stuff that physicists have no idea? Come on, man. You just revealed to the world that you left high school with a .16 GPA. Yep. I also scored a 1480 on the SAT. But yeah, I left high school with a .16 GPA. Although, you know, like, Uncle Noob did better than me, so, you know. How tall are you, Uncle Noob? I wonder, are you actually shorter than me, or am I shorter? I'm 5. Okay, my license says 5'7", so let's go with that. Yeah, so what we're talking about here is the Big Bang. All right, and so what we're talking about is the idea of applying the algorithm to the question. What's the question? What was there before the Big Bang? So we have the Big Bang, the Big Crunch. Opposites. What's the opposite of the Big Bang? The Big Crunch. Got kicked out in 10th grade? Oh man, you must have done something harsh. I don't think I've ever been kicked out. I've been suspended, but I've never been kicked out. Cool. Awesome. Alright, so you're taller, because I lied. But so that said, the Big Bang and the Big Crunch, right? These are the opposites. But they're not. They're the same thing. What is the opposite of... I'll leave it up to the chat for a sec. Who's going to get it first? Is it going to be Uncle Noob? Is it going to be Missy? Is it going to be Lauren? What is the opposite of... It sounds like bang and crunch are opposite, and they are. Expansion, contraction, right? But if you consider what the actual opposite of those two things is, it's stillness. No motion. So the source of the bang and the crunch was no motion, right? Stillness. Right. And this is the idea, of the inner sanctum, right? The idea of the thing that bridges the higher and the lower world is that inner sanctum, the abyss. The abyss is the bridge between the higher and the lower world. And what happens when you cross through the abyss? I revealed it last night. You recognize that there is no higher and lower world. There's only the abyss. Hello, Angel. Thanks for popping back in. There is no higher and lower world. There's only the abyss. There is no Big Bang or a Big Crunch. There's only the singularity. The Big Bang, from our perspective, is because we're looking up from the bottom. From God's perspective, it's a big crunch. He's looking down from the top. And guess what? He's not looking down from the top. You are. You're looking into that mirror, and it's making it look like you're looking down, but you're not. You are the same you that's on the bottom looking up at yourself, looking down at yourself, thinking that you're two separate beings looking at a world that doesn't exist. That's the reality of the moment that you're in right now. You are literally in that moment right now. We're all there. We never left. There's a concept here as far as, like, time when it comes to the Big Bang, right? Time didn't exist until the singularity, that whatever that infinite space of nothingness that is a probability distribution that's so close to zero, nothing happens for quadrillions upon quadrillions to the quadrillionth years. But eventually, within that time, due to the fact that the distribution, the probability is not zero, a particle, for no reason, came into existence. That's the story that modern physics attempts to explain our creation with, which it's actually not a bad story there. And if you consider what we're talking about, is there was a nothingness that something emerged from suddenly, and that something was that one, that point, that initial I of God becoming aware. Who? You. Becoming aware. And that was the beginning of the descent. At that moment, you started to go. And now, when you fall through the abyss, you swapped. And as you were falling, you saw the mirror, thinking that you were getting further away from something. But there is no mirror. You're in the same place. You're the same God that was born at the beginning of time, that's at the end of time, waiting for yourself to catch up. So basically the answer to the question that physicists are asking is, what happened at the beginning? There was no beginning. The beginning is the end of the last cycle. So what I'm saying is that what happened before the Big Bang was the next queen. What happened before the Big Bang was the next queen, which gives birth to the prince, which courts the princess, who gives the trials, and then the element due to the trials, which are bestowed upon him, which are installed into the queen through copulation. Due to his death, she is installed with the deacons, and then gives birth to the new prince. What happened at the beginning? The end of the last story. What happens at the end? The beginning of the next one. What happened at the beginning? The beginning of the last story. So that's the deal. That's the answer. And so you can keep looking all you want for what happened before, but the thing you have to realize is there wasn't a before. So you're not going to find it. And now, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but it is a difficult thing to wrap your head around, and I get that. But if you apply the 2 and 3 algorithm, that every 2 has a third, it's very simple. We have the bang and the crunch, the opposite being no motion, stillness. We have space and time, the opposite being no space or no time, just nothingness, the infinite nothing forever. But that nothing is conscious and is dreaming this, thinking that there's an upper and a lower world, thinking that there's a difference between our higher self and our lower, and that voice is hard to hear. No, it isn't. You're hearing it right now. You want to hear the voice of your soul? You're listening to it right now. This is your voice. Okay, so today's beautiful soul is called the Divine Lament. And there's a reason for this. And it's very powerful, actually. I just want to give it a look and then put the book down. This is the important concept everyone here needs to realize, okay? And if you go back to last night's stream, toward the end, the last half hour or whatever happened, I forget what it is. It got cut off, and so I put it in a playlist. So when you go to my channel, go into the playlists for This Will Wake You Up. Those 2 lectures, the second lecture is the one you want. That said, I told about my experience with the mirror, the window, the mirror, the window mirror. And the idea that it finally woke me up to the fact that I was seeing myself in the mirror, not in front of me, but to the side, that looked different. And why is that? Because there's this idea, there's this concept that in this place called the abyss, which is a space as you're going up the tree, during the descent and the ascent, when you hit the abyss, everything gets reversed. And I mean reversed and reversed. Everything. 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 So when you look up into that mirror, you're looking at yourself backwards, sideways, and different. When you hear your voice, you're hearing your voice call back, reversed. And let me explain that. If you were to call out to heaven and say, God, are you there? Instead of hearing the answer from above, you hear the answer from below, because it's reversed due to the fall through the abyss. and you hear from below, there is no God. See how beautiful that is? Whenever you hear the words from below that there is no God, that's the sound of the higher self of God saying, I am here. There is no God from below is because of the fact that things get twisted. You now know the code. You can now take what you're hearing, apply the translation. Wait a minute. If I heard bad from below, that means good from above. All those voices in my head telling me I'm bad and wrong, the people telling me the work is useless, or that what are you doing, or so on and so forth. You're not this, you are that. Why don't you owe it? All these things we hear. Is the arse going, you got this. You're the, you know. Remember what we're asking and where it's coming from. What we're hearing and where it's coming from. Lord, are you there? There is no God. There is no God. There is a God from above. Those are the opposites. What's the third? God's in the higher world, we're in the lower world. Those are opposites. What's the third? We are God descended, we're ascending in order to reconcile. What's the third? The third is, those two things are an opposite, same coin. The thing that's actually opposite of both of those is, you never left and we're never apart. There's no need to reconcile, there's no need to ascend or descend because you never left. Each one of the triangles is you and your higher self. You and your higher self. And this is there to just recognize that it's always was one thing. The story of the descent and the ascent and them coming together is illustrative language. It's there to point you in a direction. The fact is it's always been just the one thing. Going backwards, up and down, back up and down, this whole little pattern, and what this really winds up doing, the necessity, don't forget, the deacons were born out of necessity due to the lament of God. You call up to God and say, God, are you there? I want to know you. What is God here? What does God hear? You call up, are you there? I want to know you. I love you. I want to know you. What he hears is, right? I don't want to hear you. I don't need you. I don't even believe in you. Are you there? God hears, I don't believe in you. It's true. And God has to come to the conclusion that, wait a minute, the abyss is twisted, but he doesn't know that. He hasn't descended. And so there's this pain. And he's like, wait a minute, why don't you want to know me? And he weeps. I mean, imagine the sensation of God crying about being denied by his own creation, which is himself. It's the loss of the self. It's the work of the hermit, having the strength to go through the work of the tower, to destroy the self in order that you can realize the truth. You never left. There is no lower world. That person you're calling down to is you, that's standing right here and now. That voice from below saying there is no God was your voice from above saying I'm here, and I've always been, and you're here with me right now. Powerful stuff, right? It really is. We're talking about the descent and the ascent. We're talking about estrangement and restoration. Those are two opposites. What's the middle? Never having been apart. That's not the answer, that's the truth. Why are we ascending? Why are we descending? Well, because God became self-aware and decided he wanted to fall in order to have human experience. No, that's the answer. The truth. He never descended. You never descended. We're all together in the abyss, which is where we've always been, and we forgot, and now we're hurting each other. So what do? Realize the truth. The secret is that the sword is communication and mind. The cup is the heart and emotion. And this is us on the bottom, and this is God on top. And due to the fact of that transfer, the twisting on the way up and down, these get moved in different directions. And so what we're doing is we are receiving the love of God in our mind, our higher self, our true self. And we're receiving the divine mind into our heart. So if we want to speak to our higher self, we have to speak to its heart, not to its brain. If we want to hear the love and feel it, we have to feel that mentally. If we want to hear the voice, we have to do it emotionally. You can't hear the voice of God in your head. You can only hear it in your heart. You cannot feel the love of God in your heart. You can only feel it here. Know the love of God. Feel the mind. Know the feeling. There's always these opposites, and the opposites are the work. Just consider this circumstance and combine these together. You have rejection and bestowal, reception and lament. And it gives us the ability to gain that insight. And the more you apply the algorithm, you come to that same truth. And eventually, sometimes the first time you do the reading, you walk through. Okay? And that's that. So we covered a lot today. And, you know, there's a lot more. But really everything, which is the kind of the great part, everything that needs to be said has been said. Sometimes, you know, I'm a little unsure about the process over a live stream compared to a one-on-one. One thing I would like to do in the very near future, if at all possible, I have to find a willing person that's local to go through the process with me live in person, so everybody can see a person who is completely oblivious to everything we're talking about, and I walk them through enlightenment to the end of that process where they leave the situation having seen themselves. And you'll know it because there's an ecstatic look. It's kind of like there's like a stare to it, like kind of lost. You know, it's a cool thing to watch. I've been very, very fortunate to have seen it many times, actually. Several times. And it's really something else when you can participate in that. And not only for yourself, but for other people. Once it happens and you get it, you can share that. It's great. And that's really the point of what we're trying to do here. So, on that note, I'm just going to take a minute to kind of center. I'm out of coffee, and we all know what that means. So let me just grab that, and I will be back, and then we will go move on to some other different topics that are off this, and we can kind of review some things if anybody has any questions, do some readings or some other things, and go from there. So I just need about 5 minutes to brew my coffee and get going, and I'll see you in a minute. Alrighty. So that was cool. That went smoother than than prior streams where I was really you know, kind of not too comfortable with exactly how I was going to present everything. You know, I've done this before, but I've never presented this information in a group setting. Not this. I've taught tarot forever. I've taught divination in all forms. The concept of divination, but not this. This has been my own thing, and the only people who have ever seen close to it are clients that I've done the work with, but they don't know the ins and outs of what I'm looking at and how I do the math, so to speak. I never shared the algorithm. The algorithm of the 2-3, this is the first time I've ever spoken it, you know, like this at all, like this live kind of thing. So, consider how that can be used in all circumstances, not just your magical work or your divinatory work, but also in psychology. It's so useful for getting to the heart of the things that cause people mental pain. And the point is to alleviate suffering whenever we can, right? Isn't that the goal? While we're here to spread as much joy as we can. And that's what I think about that. So that's that said, let's take a look at we've covered a lot of stuff here. And you know, the goal of this whole journey is to get a sense of this particular technique and how to apply it to readings. And so let's go ahead and start reading some cards. And what we're going to do is not my usual readings. My usual readings, I take the deacon and I do this whole thing. And so this spread, though, now that I've revealed it, this is a little more advanced, obviously, than the one I was doing where it was a 3-card spread. And it's still effective. Anyone who's gotten one knows it's really insightful. And this spread is a little different. It's not something I'm going to do here on a live stream. This is a personal kind of thing. And what I am willing to do on a live stream with this is to talk about its use and stuff. And I'm going to, tomorrow we'll talk about the final working, which is huge. And that's why it has to be done on a one-on-one, because there's a lot. It's basically 3 sessions of several hours. And by the time we're done, not only are you going to know who you are, but you're not going to be the same. There is a transformation that occurs, just like the idea of the deck being there to elicit this particular series of steps, and the end being entering and having conversation. We all know now that the word conversation is not accurate. It's like talking to yourself, literally. So, but achieving conversation. Is the idea that this does the same thing. But what it does is in the lower world, meaning that you release of psychological pains, you release yourself of personality traits that are no longer useful. You release yourself from walking through life in a state of want and never being fulfilled, which is actually, we're designed for that from a biological perspective. That's what drives the persistence, like the compulsion to persist. But the fact is that the compulsion to persist is not dependent upon necessity. That's really just sort of like 2 sides of the same coin. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's about knowing who we are and knowing who we aren't, and getting rid of the stuff that we aren't. Because what you are at the end of the day, when we remove all of these trials, what are we looking at here as far as deacons? There's 3 of them, right? Wrong. There's 3 per sign. These are the 3 of the date of my birth, but I had to go through justice and death to get here. And now my trials are these 3 deacons, so I've been through it, and now I get to have the wisdom imparted of those trials. And I'm going to leave this situation as that new knight, a stronger person. I'm going to enter as a brand new little page that just wants to bestow what I have on the world, and I'm going to leave a very different person. So that's what this particular spread does. You know, with respect to the usage on just normal spreads, let's just do that. Let's grab a deck. I'll use the DuQuette. Tarot Ceremonial Magic, and we'll just begin with whoever wants to begin. So just throw your name in if you want to participate, and we'll just do a quick reading toward whatever. We'll find out what the subject is. You let me know what your question is, and we're going to apply some of the techniques that we've discussed to a normal tarot reading. So this is not soul talk. This is not Inner Sanctum. This is minutia of the lower worlds. All right. So and so there's no particular list. There's no for the purposes of this particular stream tonight, there's no different kind of spread that I'm normally doing related to the deacons. We'll just do like a regular tarot reading. And if you want, whoever's involved would, we could even get into maybe just for fun, we can pop into numerology and kind of take a look at the names and the numbers and some of the things there as well. Because these things all matter. These are all just different vocabularies that all point to the same knowledge. The point of what we're talking about here is the idea of trying to figure out what is really behind your question and what is the insight that you need to be given so that the question is not necessary. Questions are born out of necessity. They are the product of being in an active reception while the mind has a target, right? So it's heart and mind combined, and the sword has a very specific target for its communication. So that dichotomy causes seeking answers as opposed to being open to the truth. And so you have to kind of, apply the algorithm. Every two has a third, and that will allow you insight into any question. And now, like I mentioned before, when someone had popped in talking about their grades on a test, you don't even need the cards. But when you apply it to the cards, it's like truth on steroids. And it's powerful stuff. What's going on here? Oh, joy. I have an alert on my computer that Windows wants to update, and obviously that's not going to happen right now. Well, let's pop over. I think I might have had the chat set to I'm not sure. I know my stream drops very often and then we'll reconnect, and I won't know that happened, and so that can be difficult.